So I walk over there, and they're out there, and they're still running this crane and stuff, you know. And I said, "Oh, I thought you said it wasn't working." He says, "Well, it's working." He says, "But it's like shocking everybody." Hey, folks, this is SC Closer. My friends call me Vic. This is another episode of Vic C Stories and Tall Tales. This particular one here, you probably have heard me speak of the B&A crane. We were always having to do something to the B&A crane. But this particular story, I think I'm going to call this one high voltage. I was up in the shop, and I think I might have had duty that day. I don't remember, but it was during the work day. And one of the bosun mates came in, and he was like, "Hey, we need an electrician." And I was like, "Okay, well, what's going on?" And he says, "Man," he said, "the B&A crane out there," he says, "it's arcing and sparking." He's like, "It's, he says, it's shocking people and stuff. Something's wrong with it. We need you to look at it." So I was like, "All right," So I grabbed my tool bag and I went out there to see what was going on. So I walk over there, and they're out there, and they're still running this crane and stuff, And I said, "Oh, I thought you said it wasn't working." He says, "Well, it's working." He says, "But it's like shocking everybody and everything." And he pointed to the deck. He said, "You see that black spot there?" He says, "That's where the hook came down, when they lowered the crane down and the hook touched the deck." He said it made, a big arc and spark and smoke and stuff went everywhere. And I said, "Well, that's odd." And I was like, "Well, tell them to bring the hook back down here, And so they came back around with the thing, and they dropped it down, and it hit the deck, and pow, man, it popped, and there was smoke everywhere. And I was like, "Holy crap." And I said, "Hang on a minute." I said, "Tell them to lift it up a little bit." So they lifted it up, and they got it, about a foot off the deck. So I went over there, and I had a fluke then. A fluke is a little multimeter type of tool. It's digital. Back then, it was real high tech. This is the 80s. And we only had a few of those. They only let a few of us have those. And I took that thing, and I put it on voltage reading. And I walked over there, and I put one lead on the hook, and I put another lead on the deck, which was the ground. And that thing read 740 or 750 volts. And I was like, "Whoa, 750 volts." And I was just standing there saying it. I said, 750 volts. And then both mate's like, "Well, what's that mean?" And I looked at him, I said, "We don't have anything on this ship that makes 750 volts. He goes, "What?" I said, "No." I said, "The generator makes 450. I said, and the shore power is 450. And we were in port. I said, the shore power is 450 coming in here. It goes through isolation transformers and steps it down to 115 for the lights, and your receptacles and your average stuff. The 450 is for the bigger equipment like the B&A crane." So, I wouldn't have been surprised if it was reading 400, 450 volts, because then you'd say, well, it's got a ground in it or something shorted or something. But 750 volts. I was like, I don't know where that's coming from. So I was a little bit perplexed. But it was working. So I just told him, I said, "Y'all just hang on a minute with this thing and let me look around." So I walk out on the aircraft elevator, which is where they were bringing stuff in off the pier and sitting it on the aircraft elevator and bringing it into the hangar bays, what they were doing. I'm looking around, and, I'm looking up at the crane, and I look up there, and there's a radio antenna up there. That's a transmitting antenna. And I said, "You know what?" I said, "Hang on a second." I said, y'all just wait a few minutes." I said, "I'll be right back." So I went up to the O2 level, and I went to the radio shack. And that's where the radio men are at. And I knocked on the door, because they don't just let you in there, because that's top secret and everything, and you have to have a clearance and all to get in there. So I just knock on the door or whatever, or maybe they had a doorbell or something, I don't remember. And anyway, one of them comes to the door, and I know some of these guys, And the fella comes to the door, and I knew him. But he came to the door, and I said, "Hey, are you guys transmitting anything?" And he was like, "Why are you asking?" And I said, well, I said, you know, the bosun mates out here operating the B&A crane, and somehow 750 volts is getting transmitted into this crane somehow, and it's shocking people, and it's burning the deck, and it's causing all kind of problems. And we don't have anything that makes 750 volts, but I did notice that there's a transmission antenna up there that you guys operate, and I just wanted to make sure that you guys weren't transmitting or something, because I'm trying to figure out where this is coming from. So he said, hang on a minute. So he goes in there and he comes back out, and he told me, because he knew me, I guess. He's like, okay, yeah, some of the guys, says we were trying to transmit and talk somewhere in San Francisco. And he's like, actually, you know, when we're in port, we're not supposed to be doing that, and everything. He said, so yeah, it says, I told them to knock it off. He said, so they're going to stop now, so you should be okay. He said, go back and check, it'll probably be fine, and all. And so I was like, man, y'all need to be more careful with this stuff, you know. And he's like, yeah, you know, he says, oh, sorry about that, you know. And I guess he didn't want me to go report him or anything for this, I guess. But I went back down there and I checked it, and it was dead then. You know, it wasn't reading that anymore. And the bosun mate said, what'd you do to fix it? And I said, I just told the radio men to knock it off. I said, they were inducing a voltage into it, and they were looking at me like, that can happen? I said, yeah, it can happen.